Readers, today we're going to be doing another read aloud for our unit, A Deep Study of Characters. This will also be a short story from French Kiss and Other Traumas by Adam Bagdasarian. And in this story, Will is in the 4th grade. This text is called Popularity, and we're going to read it to see if we can figure out a bit more about the kind of character that Will is, especially in the 4th grade. I just want to remind you of some things we've been thinking about a lot lately. We've been thinking about what we know about stories. Story elements like characters, plot, setting, repeating objects. We've also been thinking about ways to really do our very best thinking work, drawing on all we know and reading to interpret texts. So once again, we're going to be trying to read to see meaningful details in stories. And I want to remind you that whenever we're reading a story, it's important that we think about the kind of thinking work that's most necessary. So if we're just starting a text, let's just try this again. We're probably going to be thinking about what happens in the beginning. What happens in the beginning, what we learn about characters often, especially since our unit is characters and a deep study of characters. So we'll be looking closely at details to really try to get a sense for Will's traits and feelings. I'm going to jump right in, and you can follow along beside me. I will be reading off of our Padlet. You also can find this in Google Classroom. Let's get started. Somewhere inside me, I knew that 10-year-old boys were not supposed to spend their recess circling oak trees in search of 4-leaf clovers. Still, that's what I and my equally unpopular acquaintances, Alan Gold and Alan Shipman, were doing, while the rest of our classmates played tag and kickball and pushed each other higher and higher on the swings. So even though my goal is to pay attention to characters, I'm not going to ignore the other kinds of details I'm seeing. For instance, where are they? The setting. Seems like they're probably at school, it's recess. Definitely seems like they're outdoors, they're playing on the swings. So maybe you're trying to get a picture in your mind of how the story begins, where they are. And that will help us see the deeper sense of the character, even just by thinking about setting and other story elements to help with that. Let's keep going. Aside from having a little more than our share of baby fat, the two Allens and I had very little in common. In fact, we could barely stand one another. Still, during recess, we were the only company we had, so we tried to make the best of it. Now and then, one of us would bend forward, pick a clover, examine it, shake his head, and let it fall to the ground. So now that I am starting to dive deeper into the characters, I see some dialogue coming up. I'm going to be paying close attention to what I can learn about this character, Will, and his traits and feelings. So let's just be looking closely for details that might reveal that. Got one, Alan said. Let's see, Alan Shipman said. Alan showed Alan the clover. That's only 3. No, that's 4. Right here, see? That's not a whole leaf, Alan Shipman said sourly. There's 1 leaf, 2 leaves, 3 leaves, 4 leaves. That's not a whole leaf. We haven't heard much from Will, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be paying attention to the other characters. Again, we can learn about a character by looking at other story elements around him too. So what are some things we're trying to notice about these other characters, the two Allens? Seems like maybe they argue a lot. It seems like they are unhappy. Maybe they're kind of frustrated. Let's keep reading to see what else we can figure out. We had been looking for 4-leaf clovers every school day for 6 months, and each of us knew exactly what he would do if he found one. He would hold the lucky clover tight in his hand, close his eyes, and wish he was so popular that he would never have to spend time with the other two again. That's an interesting thing to say. That's kind of starting to give me the idea that these characters are a bit unhappy. I was just noticing that from their arguing, and have this inner thinking that I'm starting to hear from our narrator. It seems like they're pretty unhappy. Maybe they're left out a lot. Again, the story is called Popular, so I'm kind of like waiting for something about popularity to really come up. And he's referencing it here for the first time that they wish they could spend time with other people, like they have to be together. That makes me feel like these characters are kind of maybe sad too. Let me keep reading on. And now I'm going to be thinking about maybe what particular details could help me really confirm this idea that they're unhappy, that maybe they're frustrated, maybe they're unpopular because they're unhappy. I don't know. Let me keep reading to see. Got one, Alan Shipman said. Alan Gold swiped the clover from him. 1, 2, 3, he said, throwing it to the ground. There's 4 there. That was a 4-leaf clover. Pick it up. You pick it up. You pick it up. You. Definitely seem pretty unhappy. And they don't really seem to like each other very much, do they? So I'm like, why are they really hanging out? They have no one else to hang out with? Maybe they like being miserable? Do you see I'm now starting to kind of grow my idea about my first initial noticing that they seem pretty unhappy? I'm noticing this grow a bit because they continue to fight and argue, yet they continue to hang out with each other. So maybe it's that they aren't just unhappy, but they kind of like it? I don't know. I'm going to keep seeing if I can add on any more details to confirm this or grow this theory. While the two Allens faced off, I looked across the black tar and asphalt at a crowd of boys who were making more noise and seemed to be having more fun than anyone else on the playground. These were the popular boys, and in the center of this group stood their leader, Sean Owens. Sean Owens was the best student in the 4th grade. He was also one of the humblest, handsomest, strongest, fastest, most clear-thinking 10-year-olds that God had ever placed on the face of the earth. Sean Owens could run the 50-yard dash in 6 seconds, hit a baseball 200 feet, and throw a football 40 yards. The only thing Sean didn't have was a personality. That's pretty mean, isn't it? It's kind of adding on to my idea that they're kind of maybe are miserable or unhappy, almost like cynical, like they like being unhappy. They like to kind of pick on other people, even though they're the ones who kind of feel like they are being picked on. I keep reading that. I'm going to take a big pause and really think this through. He didn't need one. So he didn't need a personality. Wow, it's something interesting to say. When you can hit a baseball at 200 feet, all you have to do is round the bases and wait for the world's adulation. I'm going to pause right there and think back to what I know I'm supposed to be doing about character work, thinking deeply about the kinds of characters that are in this story and what I can learn about them. So I just want to think about what I've seen so far. I've seen some really unhappy characters. I'm kind of getting that sense from the way that they talk to each other, from the way that they think. And now I'm thinking a bit more deeply about the way that this main character, Will, is thinking, our narrator. So this time, I'm going to be looking back and thinking, can I find specific evidence that supports my idea that this character is maybe a bit, I don't know, bitter, sarcastic, maybe a bit unhappy? Is there anything in the text that can support that? I can be looking to specifically at what he says, what he does, what he thinks, and what he feels. So I'm going to go back to the text. I'm going to leave this out while I reread a little bit to you. And I'm going to think about what exactly I can use to support the idea that maybe this character is a bit unhappy, a bit bitter, a bit cynical, sarcastic, likes being unhappy. Keep going. Reread, rather, thinking about these specific things. Going back to the beginning, I'm going to read some parts that kind of stuck with me, parts where I really felt like I was pausing, and see, are there any specific feelings, traits, things that the character does that really confirm that he's a bit bitter? Let's see. I'm going to reread this part here, and you think about it as I read it aloud. Aside from having a little more than our share of baby fat, the two Allens and I had very little in common. Okay, so that inner thinking, like, he's just kind of hanging out with them because he's also kind of insulting them, like, and himself as well. It's like this, like, kind of like cruel feelings or thinking toward himself. I'm gonna skip down and see other parts I stopped at. While the two islands faced off, I looked across the black tar and asphalt at a crowd of boys who were making more noise and seemed to be having more fun than anyone else on the playground. So now he's looking, like what he's doing is he's looking across the playground at other boys, other kids. Maybe he wants to hang out with more. Like he said before, that these kids have nothing in common. And he'd rather kind of be somewhere else. These were the popular boys. In the center of this group stood their leader, Sean Owens. And he's just kind of like admiring Sean Owens from afar, but then he also does not hesitate to insult him a bit. He says the only thing Sean didn't have was a personality. It's not a very nice thing to say, isn't it? Is it? So it's almost like he's like, that's also like really extreme. Like, I don't know, has anyone said, have you ever heard someone say that before? Have they really meant it? Have they always been talking about, I don't know, like trying to insult the other person? Or is it maybe a bit of envy there? So now I'm just kind of wondering in this moment, is it really that he just like doesn't like other kids? Or is it actually more like he wants to be like the other kids? Is it maybe that this is the part where he's showing us a bit of envy when he's looking at the other kids across the playground? Do you see how I grew my idea by starting by thinking about what am I supposed to be paying attention to at the beginning of the story? Now, what am I noticing about what the character says, does, thinks, feels? What traits, feelings am I starting to see emerge? And this led me to have some ideas about the character that I then checked and confirmed. And then after I started to find specific details, what he says, does, thinks, feels, that kind of confirm it, I can then stick with that theory for a little while longer. So what I want you to do when you're on your own today, when you're reading on your own, I would really like for you to try this exact same work out. I would love for you to read by paying close attention to the details at the beginning, the middle, or the end of your book. And I would like you to try to think about the characters' traits and feelings by really examining what they say, they do, they think, they feel, and trying to not just notice those things this time, but to grow an idea about the kind of person the character is. Remember, depending on where you are in the book, will really shape the way you start. You might be thinking about characters, but you also be using things that you already have been noticing about the story as well. Like, for instance, the setting. That helped me a lot today. If you're a bit farther into the book, so you could be thinking about the different plot points and repeating objects as well. So I can't wait to see what you do in your own book club book, independent reading book, whatever you've been assigned to think about today. I'd like you to try this exact same work. And remember, you can use the tools that are on the Padlet and on Google Classroom to help you. Enjoy, readers.